Why build an aqueduct when you got a river nearby? Why the aqueduct channel is so large? How straight the aqueducts were? And how did cities live without aqueducts?
In this video, we will answer this and some other questions. But I want to start with a very simple question. What is an aqueduct? And is this an aqueduct? Hello, I am Maria, the author, the voice and the artist of this video. And the answer to the question whether this is an aqueduct or not is not as straightforward as it may seem to be, because the answer is both yes and no. The first association that comes to my mind when I'm thinking of an aqueduct is a long arch bridge with a channel in the upper part. This easy to recognize image, even despite its numerous variations, is indisputably associated with aqueducts. But the thing is that everything is a little bit more complicated.
Actually, for most of its length, an aqueduct is not a bridge at all. It is a complex of covered channels laid on the ground and underground tunnels. What we are used to call an aqueduct is only one of its elements, which was intended to support the aqueduct when it had to cross a river or lowland, or to maintain the necessary slope. An example of this arch structure you could see in the screen right now. But remember, this is only a tiny part of an aqueduct. The entire aqueduct could consist of a whole system of channels, underground tunnels, service shafts, venter bridges, siphons, and various reservoirs. In other words, an aqueduct is called an entire set of engineering structures for water supply.
Actually, this specific element also can and should be called an aqueduct. This is commonly accepted narrow use of term to refer to a bridge that supports the channel with water.
Therefore, it's not a mistake to say that this is an aqueduct. Just keep in mind that an aqueduct is actually something more complex than just a bridge, and it could stretch for miles. The more precise term for this exact structure is aqueduct bridge. So let's recap. Thinking about aqueduct in this way is not very accurate. And this way is more correct. And by the way, the word aqueduct comes from two Latin words, aqua, water, and duco, I lead, from ducere, to lead.
To prepare this video, I studied hundreds of pages, mainly research papers and articles from resources dedicated to history, and I will leave all sources that I used in video description.
Another of my misconceptions about an aqueduct was that it was supposed to be straight, or maybe with some minimal curve. And that's not true at all. Look at this illustration. This is a map of the Aspendas Aqueduct from the ramak.org website. To move water from one place to another using the force of gravity, a constant slope had to be maintained. The channels placed on the Earth's surface were the cheapest element of the aqueduct. So, if a constant slope could be achieved by following the topography, the aqueduct would have a very complex road, not straight at all. And the Roman engineers tried to make full use of the terrain. Here we can see the aqueduct of the city of Ephesus. They are even more curved. If you are interested in the topic, you could find other similar examples on the website yourself. What if there is no aqueduct in the city? I mean, people used to live without it. We can still see hundreds of aqueducts nowadays. You can find a catalogue of all known ancient aqueducts and a map on the excellent ramak.org website. But of course, not every city had an aqueduct, or at least, not at every stage of its development. If the city did not have an aqueduct, then where did the water came from? Wells, cisterns and springs did an excellent job. Some towns, such as Silleon, that is located not far from Aspendas, relied on cisterns throughout its history and never had an aqueduct. In Aspendas, another ancient city in Asia Minor, the aqueduct did not appear immediately either. There are two springs at the foot of the hill, and near one of them there is even a staircase up the hill. It could be used to go down to the spring. There are also more than 10 cisterns on the Aspendas hill itself to collect rainwater. And note the coating on the walls of the cistern. This is a special waterproof cement used in ancient times. You will see it on any surface that needs to be waterproofed in order to function. Remember what it looks like, so you could easily identify water cisterns in archaeological sites. It might seem strange, but the purpose of aqueduct was not to provide drinking water. As mentioned above, cisterns and wells were perfectly suitable for this purpose. The main reason for building an aqueduct was the need to bring water to the baths, which were an important part of Roman culture, and the baths need a lot of water. Of course, aqueduct also provide clean drinking water, and that's the second reason. And the third, strange as it may seem, it was a question of prestige and political influence. When an aqueduct was built in one town, the neighboring towns tried to build their own aqueducts as well. The money might have come from a wealthy individual with political ambitions. However, more often, it was only the emperor who could afford such an expense. As one article say, the cost of building an aqueduct in ancient times would probably be comparable to the cost of building an airport today. Why build an aqueduct if you already have a river? Why should someone spend so much resources when there is a river nearby? Aspendas is on the banks of Eurymedon River, and the city has a pretty large aqueduct, highest in the Turkey. Many Roman cities were built on the banks of the river, Rome for example. But there was not always enough water in the river to supply the baths and fountains in the city, and there were no pumps in those days. So, water had to be taken from the river upstream from the city, and even in this case, however, there could be some problems. The water level in the river could fluctuate, becoming lower during the dry periods. The water in the river also could become muddy during the heavy rains. In addition to that, the used water from fields and farms upstream could flow into the river. As a result, the use of the river as a source of drinking water was not very convenient. The best solution to this problem was the usage of a spring or any other water source further upstream from the town. It guaranteed a permanent access to water all year round. It also guaranteed a constant supply of high-quality water. And interesting fact, some of the springs used for the Roman aqueducts are still in use today.
You definitely notice that English is not my first language. And it's quite hard for me to make in a voiceover and especially being in front of the camera. And in general, it was very difficult for me to overcome all my fears and finally start this historical channel in English. So I would highly appreciate if you drop some encouraging lines for me in the comment section or just to give a like to this video. This will really support me a lot. And thank you for watching and for your interest to the history of ancient Rome.
When you see something like this, it is very easy to believe that aqueducts were a remarkable technological feat in antiquity, something extraordinary. However, this is not the case. This is a map of surviving aqueducts from romac.org. It contains information on over 1,600 aqueducts. That's quite a lot. Aqueducts were not something exceptional in antiquity. It was a proven engineering solution to the city's water supply. Aqueducts were not used only by the Romans. Canals and tunnels for water supply were used in Mesopotamia, Crete, Egypt, and Persia. However, aqueducts reached their height in the Mediterranean region during antiquity. The most famous ancient works devoted to aqueducts and water supply are 10 books on architecture by Vitruvius and Sextus Iulius Frontinus on aqueducts of Rome. A PDF is available on the internet. By the way, Sextus Frontinus was the supervisor of the Rome water system for several years. Before that, he was in charge of building the water and sewage system in Hierapolis, and he seems to have done an excellent job. The people of Hierapolis even named an ark after Frontinus. Here is it. Rome's oldest aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was built in 312 BC. It was 16 kilometers long. By the end of the 1st century AD, Rome's water supply system includes 9 aqueducts. Water for most of them came from the valley of the river Anio, modern name Aniene. The river itself, and the springs located there. The river was fed by mountains, so the quality of the water supplied to Rome was excellent. The length of the aqueducts varied from 17 to 90 kilometers. In total, the length of all aqueducts supplying Rome was 440 kilometers. Here is a table of ancient aqueducts with lengths. The longest, in Constantinople, was as much as 250 kilometers, and 4 of Rome's 11 aqueducts were longer than 50 kilometers. When it comes to Rome aqueducts, just 5% of the total length consist of water channels placed on arch bridges. For other 95%, it ran through closed canals or tunnels. This is a usual number for Roman aqueducts, and by the way, Latin word for water channel is specus. It is believed that on average 80% of its length, the aqueduct was laid in an excavated channel or trench right on the Earth's surface. The canal was covered over to prevent the water loss through evaporation and avoid heating. With such a length of the aqueduct, water loss must be minimized as much as possible. Often, the walls of canals were covered with the mortar known as opus signinum. The material was made from ceramic slabs mixed with lime and was resistant to temperature changes, making it less likely to crack. Opus signinum was also used to build floors. Here is a modern reconstruction of a floor made using this material. Shards are more visible. On this picture, you could see how typical aqueduct channel looks like. This is the trench, the base, the walls, and the vault of the channel. Part of the walls are covered with waterproof concrete, opus signinum. This particular canal has a vaulted roof, but there are other types of roofs: gabled roof, corbelled roof, or flat roof. There is a table showing the dimensions of the channels. It is important to note that the volume of water was not directly related to the cross-section of the conduit. The water never occupied the entire volume. The conduits were only partially filled. The larger size was mainly for the convenience of maintenance work on the aqueduct, as it needed to be cleaned and repaired. The fact that lime deposits would build up on the walls over time should also be considered. Most of the sources for the aqueduct were karst springs, groundwater coming to the surface through limestone rock. Look at the photo of this Nims aqueduct. Almost 2/3 of the original 120 centimeters wide canal has been eaten away by lime deposits. The dotted line shows the canal walls. Of course, it took several centuries to do this, but as you can see, the fact that sediments were deposited on the walls shouldn't have been disregarded during the planning of the aqueduct. Deposits on the walls of the Eiffel Aqueduct in Cologne grew at a rate of 1 millimeter per year. In the Middle Ages, they were carefully removed and used as building material. There is the columns of the church portal in Maastricht. They are made of this material. The aqueduct of Constantinople had been in use for 7 centuries. It was regularly cleaned of lime deposits. This was determined by analyzing the isotopes of sediments deposited on the surface of the canal walls. Not all Roman aqueducts were covered channels or trenches. Pipes were also used. Inside the cities, water was most often distributed through lead or clay pipes. Stone and lead pipes are also used for inverted siphons, and I will have a separate video about the siphons. Incidentally, in the case of lead pipes, the deposits were beneficial because they created a kind of insulation between the lead and the water, and the Romans were well aware of health hazards of lead. For easy maintenance and inspection of the tunnels, manholes were also built. Sometimes they were combined with settling basins, this lowered part in the bottom. The aqueduct had to have a constant gradient. This means that there was always a certain gradient, but it was not necessarily the same gradient along the whole length. The slope was greater at the beginning and slowly decreased towards the consumption point. Gradient of a Roman aqueduct was something in between these numbers. The most applied leveling tools were the horobots and the groma. Also, it is worth mentioning that the water channel itself could be used as a leveling tool. Here is a photo of building a canal in Turkey. You can see the small dams that divide the channel. This was done to help with leveling. You may be curious about how the aqueducts were built. In this video, I am not going to talk about the construction of the aqueduct. This topic needs its own video. Tools, techniques, materials, and problems. All that would be covered in one of the next videos. Now, some numbers on gradients. The aqueduct of Nîmes, where the Pont du Gard is, has a slope of 67 cm per kilometer for the first 15 kilometers. The next 10 kilometers have a slope of only 7 cm per kilometer. This is impressive accuracy, even by modern standards, especially since the terrain here is quite complex and there are 4 more bridges in the system. The Aspendos aqueduct, near the springs in the mountains, has a slope of 160 meters per kilometer. The Carthage aqueduct has a slope of 95 meters per kilometer for the first 6 kilometers. Some parts of Carthage aqueduct are still in use after modern reconstruction and the addition of new pipes. In 1995, its capacity was 150 liters per second. That is somewhere around 13,000 cubic meters a day. The road of the aqueduct usually runs through hilly or even mountainous terrain. If it was not possible to follow the terrain, auxiliary structures had to be built to raise the conduit, or a conduit had to be cut straight through the rock. Here a very unusual section of aqueduct belonging to the city of Side. Channel was cut into the rock parallel to the flow of the Manavgat river. If the channel had to be raised to maintain its level, a substructure, or simply a wall, was used up to about 2 meters. Bridges were used for higher levels. One of the highest bridges or aqueducts is the famous Pont du Gard across the Gardon River, formerly called Gard, which is a part of aqueduct system of Nîmes. Its height is 47 meters. It is believed that 50 meters was the limit for the height of Roman bridge. If the aqueduct need to cross a deeper plane, Roman engineers preferred to use another technology, inverted siphon. I will tell about it in a separate video. Sometimes several aqueducts share one bridge. The 5 aqueducts in Rome shared 2 bridges. Aqua Tepolo and Aqua Iulia used the bridge of the aqueduct Aqua Marcia. Aqua Ania Novus shared the bridge with Aqua Claudia. Technically, it was not difficult. It simply involved building another conduit on top of the first conduit. Here is the Arc Bridge. The upper brick demolished parts belongs to Aqua Anio Novus, and below, the Aqua Claudia conduit was located directly on the arcs. And here are the Aqua Anio Novus and Aqua Claudia by Porta Maggiore. Here you can clearly see both conduits. Note that they are covered. Another misconception I had was that the water just flows on top of the aqueduct, like in Caesar 3. There is an U-shape and the water flowing in it. And that is not true, of course. The conduit on the pillars has always been covered. This is the aqueduct of Carthage, for example. Do you see the conduit laying on the remains of the arcs? It was big enough to be walked. In this picture, it looks like the canal was opened in some places, but it was not. It is just the slabs collapsed over time. Why would Rome need so many aqueducts? Well, first of all, a big city needs a lot of water. And the second reason is that not all the aqueducts always worked. Both archaeological and written sources testify that the aqueducts were broke down frequently, and the repair process was rather complicated and time-consuming. Sextus Frontinus complained that they broke down because of miscalculations and defects in their construction. The Aqua Claudia aqueduct was built in 52 AD. Over the next 19 years, it worked only for 10 years. The other 9 years were spent waiting for repairs. The reasons for breaking are not clear. One theory says that the arcs were not designed to withstand the stress of multiple channels. The arcs of the Aqua Claudia were repaired and the bridge piers were reinforced with extra layers of brick and mortar, making them several feet thicker. Another theory speaks of the effects of temperature variations. Frontinus himself wrote that for this reason underground channels were preferable, as they were not affected by heat and frost and were generally less prone to damage. Whatever the reason, the structural failures resulted in leaks. This reduced the amount of water flowing into the city. By the way, Frontinus himself failed to calculate the volume of water flowing through the aqueduct. He considered the volume of water to depend only on the cross-section of the canal and did not take the speed of the water into account. However, it is still difficult to calculate the exact volume of water that actually entered Rome. The fact is that the only parameter available to us is the cross-sectional area of the aqueduct canals, but the canals were never completely filled, and its height, as you already know, was more determined by the need to carry out works there, rather than by the volume of water passing through. And the capacity of the springs feeding the aqueducts at that time is also unknown. And on top of that, there were leaks and water thefts. Yes, water from the aqueducts could be stolen, and that was the problem. And I will make a separate video about this subject. And then there is the fact that some of Rome's aqueducts were periodically under repair, and they never worked all at the same time. There are, however, some opinions about the amount of water that aqueducts might have supplied. Rome's 11 aqueducts could supply up to 1 million cubic meters of water a day, a figure comparable to Paris of 1970s. The Eiffel Aqueduct, 21,000 cubic meters a day. And the Lyon Aqueduct's capacity is estimated at 75,000.
In one of the next videos I will tell you about 9 types of basins used in a Roman water system. And I'm pretty sure that you have never heard about basins or reservoirs in the context of aqueducts. But surprisingly, these are the things without which aqueduct could not exist. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.